Camille Thurman, how are you doing?
I'm good. How are you?
I'm doing all right. I'm doing all right. Uh, you know, I, you're you're all over the place in social media, and I started noticing you. I don't know, a couple years ago,
Hmm.
and following you, and you know, you got it all happening, right? The singing and the woodwinds. That honestly, that was something. I'm a woodwind guy, and that was something that was appealing about your musicianship. But the whole thing is really happening. Why don't you talk to us a little bit about yourself and where you're from and where you grew up and what your childhood was like?
Sure. I come from a small town called St. Albans, Queens, in New York City, and it actually happened to, at one time, be the home to many jazz greats, Ella Fitzgerald, Count Basie, Milton Hinton, you name it. And I didn't know about the history of my neighborhood until my mother, she was doing some research for her thesis of hers, and she would make her learning experience my learning experience. So as she was studying and doing research on the neighborhood, she stumbled upon this history, and then she fell in love with jazz and introduced me to jazz. And um, I didn't pick up an instrument until I was about 4 or 5 years old, and started on violin, and then once to middle school, picked up the saxophone and the flute. And it was because of my band teacher. He encouraged my mom to have me audition for specialized high school, LaGuardia High School, and I did that, and I got in, and that's where I got introduced to the tenor saxophone. I actually was playing alto, but it was because I got a scholarship to a camp, and the deal was if I played tenor, they let me go full ride. And of course, I didn't want to play tenor. I didn't see any other girls playing tenor,
Mm.
and on the petite side, so having a tenor next to me in in eighth grade was a nightmare. And it was actually listening to Dexter Gordon, The Second Balcony Jump on the album Go that made me just change my mind and change my attitude. When I heard him
Dexter will
play,
do that to you.
yeah, I didn't know what I was doing, but I knew when I heard him, what he was doing was what I wanted to do ultimately, and that just put me right on the right direction.
Now, can you talk about your singing?
Sure. Well, I actually kept that a secret a long time. Um, Coming up playing instruments, it's funny because I used to go to school in Manhattan, and I would have to take the bus and the train. People would always look at me kind of funny because they would see this big instrument on my back, and then they would always ask me, can you play?" Of course, in my mind, I'm like, "Yes, I could play. I carry this instrument. I want to,
Right.
be massive. I'm not just doing it for my health." And I remember, a couple of times you'd hang out with the guys in the band, and people would see that if you're the only girl, they'd be like, "Oh, so you're the vocalist in the band." Not that there's anything wrong with it, but I would have my instrument with me. And I would kind of be like, "Oh, I play with guys, I play an instrument." And I guess now in my 13, 14, 15-year-old mind, I figured out, wow, people have an easier time assuming if you're a lady that you sing rather than play. And I did sing, but I thought, you know what? Let me keep that a secret because I want to prove myself on my horn and, you know, let people know I could play. This is what I'm serious about, what I do. I was always questioned about it. But it wasn't until I got to college where my professor at the time, Michael Carbone, he encouraged me to sing and play. And for a long time, I always felt that if you're going to pick an instrument, you should be serious about it and study it. Don't just do things just because, oh, I can do it, just because I can do it. I wanted to be taken seriously. I always had that mindset. And for me, I was like, well, if I'm putting the time on my saxophone, say you play saxophone. Not putting the time, just don't say it, that's what you do.
Mm.
But they kind of really helped me. Him and Mimi Jones, of course, Antoine Roney, they kind of pushed me to do both. And they
Mm.
showed me that whole new world of Louis Jordan and By Red and how they were able to do it. So.
Yeah, I interviewed Antoine, and I've known him for a while. That's a beautiful brother.
Yeah, yeah,
Yeah, good dude. It's easy to have several hours disappear when you're around him because he's
yeah.
such a great listener and is very inquisitive. He's always kind of asking questions about and is very insightful.
Oh, definitely. I spent hours at his house just talking about saxophone and different tunes, Dexter, you name it, playing.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. And rest in peace. His brother Wallace passed away recently. We talked a little bit about his brother, and Antoine he's such a humble dude.
Yeah.
He's very effective at deflecting. Which is a sign of it's actually a sign of greatness because you realize that none of this came from you. It all came from someone else. And especially with what it is that we do, especially with jazz, it's so much of it is about carrying the torch, right? Not necessarily recreating the torch, but carrying the torch. That's not to say that our personalities can't shine through the music, but a lot of it is about being ambassadors and all of that.
Yeah. I mean, he definitely does that. He puts so much time into the younger generation.
Mm-hmm.
So many musicians I can think of that the first stop that they went to when they came to New York City was visiting Antoine Roney for that introduction to just life on the scene, figuring it out, and how to be able to last for the long haul as a musician.
Now you play piano too, right?
I don't. I know how it works harmonically.
Oh. Did you start taking? I have some notes here. I was doing some research, and did you start on piano, or did you take piano lessons or something when you were growing up?
Well, when I was growing up, my mother played piano, and how
Okay.
I guess I figured out I had perfect pitch was when she would practice late at night. I actually was listening to the music, even though I was kind of asleep, and I would wake up the next day and play the same thing she played. And she didn't know that I was doing that until one day I signed up for a talent show at my elementary school, and she was like, "What are you gonna play? You don't play anything." Because I stopped playing violin. I was like, "Oh, I'm gonna play piano." And she was like, "You never played piano. You never took lessons." I was like, "Yeah, uh huh." And the talent show came. She came to the show, and I played verbatim the stuff that she was practicing while I was asleep. And her mouth was on the floor. Yeah.
All right.
I could pluck out some chords by ear, but as far as calling me a straight pianist, mm-mm.
Well, I mean, I play keyboard. I don't. I almost I like resist the word piano because that's like more serious than my piano playing. I mean, yes and no. I mean, I play keyboard at church, but I don't. I don't. The separate activities with my hands in reading separate staves at the same time, that part of it is not as yeah.
It's a skill.
That's right. That's right.
Yeah.
I took this what was it? Advanced musicianship course when I was working on my doctorate. Thank you so much for watching my video so far. If you'd like to support, there are several ways to do so below. Also, likes are free. Please comment, share, and subscribe. Now back to the video. My doctorate. Mm-hmm. And it was an interesting class because it forced you to have to, so you had to read 2 or 3, actually up to 4 staffs simultaneously. And yeah, and there were different clefs, right? And then sometimes it would be like mixed meter stuff where one of the staffs was like a different, or was implying a different meter.
Right.
And that was very challenging. It's probably one of the best classes I've ever taken, though.
I bet.
But yeah, so, but that lets me know that that's not my primary instrument.
For me, I understand the language. I understand harmonically, and I try to make it a thing where I'm able to understand so I can communicate. Mm-hmm. I think that's something a lot of young students have to kind of eventually at some point in their development do. Be familiar with the language, how to communicate. I mean, especially as a vocalist, mm-hmm. if you want pianists in your band to set you up harmonically in a certain way or play certain turnarounds or certain substitutions,
right? I
can't just be like, do that thing. No, I got to understand exactly what it is, especially as a horn player, so I can be able to play it and tell them what it is for her.
Yeah, my favorite thing is your side man in the band, and the band leader doesn't do a particularly good job of explaining or describing what they want, and they just say, you'll hear it. that's like the cliche.
To that. I never forget. Somebody was telling me a story. I think they played with Freddie Hubbard or something, and he would just play the tune. I'm like, oh, you'll get it, and just play it. And then the guys are and I guess they just started playing with him or something. It was brand new working with him, so they're just kind of like. But after a while, a couple of tries of doing that on a couple of gigs, they got it. But in that situation, yeah. But for the most part, it helps really explain.
Now, do you write? I mean, are you yeah. So, in your composing, mm-hmm. Are you doing that from the piano, or okay?
It's a combination. I'm doing it from the piano. I'm doing it from being able to sing it, just write it down, mm-hmm. and sometimes my horn. But for the most part, I sit at the piano and just play voices. Right. It's just the best way for me to be able to get to the heart of exactly the sound that I want. Yeah.
Yeah, most of my writing is from the piano. I do this thing, and you play a lot of instruments, so I think you probably benefit from this if you know you are or not. But I think the more instruments that you can play, the sort of better you understand different aspects of the music.
Oh,
you know.
Oh yeah.
It's like an old classical composer, trick. It's not really a trick or process, I guess I should call it.
Understanding instrument from the inside out.
That's right. I mean, so basically you get lessons with someone, say, hey, I'm going to go start taking clarinet lessons. And so that you can learn, Mozart, his clarinet concerto, the one everyone plays. But he wasn't a clarinet player, but obviously he understands the clarinet quite well.
Right.
So that leads me to believe that he probably studied the clarinet. He probably can actually play some clarinet, even if it's not, great playing. So that's I think it's an advantage that multi-instrumentalists have over folks that, you know, just play one instrument.
Yeah, it's a huge advantage because you understand, I mean, just dealing with the woodwinds, you understand range, texture,
Yeah. Yep.
colors, you understand timbre, what the possibilities are for each instrument, and then within the instrument itself, the different ways of coloring the sound, even if it's just one note. You're also able to understand, like when it comes to fingering, oh, great, because you could transfer all that knowledge within the instruments. And
Mm-hmm.
then, of course, as an arranger, especially for woodwinds, if you have a great understanding of each of the woodwinds, you could arrange the heck out of a piece for
Oh yeah.
three, four,
Oh
or
yeah.
five pieces. And then, of course, harmonically, if you have that understanding of the language too, it's great for your writing.
Absolutely. So, I know a lot of musicians with perfect pitch. It's something. It's a. This is a budding research project that I've been sort of embarking on. Right.
Okay.
I used to have. Well, I didn't used to. There's a long time ago, several years ago, I started doing these videos on YouTube called Lesson of the Week, and one of them, I think, was it was I think I was calling it relative pitch, true pitch, perfect pitch, or something like this, and it's actually one of the videos that I did that got a lot of comments. You know, a lot of people, you know, wanted to be part of the conversation, so to speak. And you have everywhere from people believing that you can develop perfect pitch, you know, to so if you just, you know, buy this course and do these exercises, you know, this amount of time for this long, then you will have developed perfect pitch. But so you can't actually learn perfect pitch, but I think a lot of people are resistant to believing because they want to believe that they can learn it. They want to believe that it's a skill that they can eventually acquire.
Right.
But what these courses tend to teach is how to memorize a note. So if you can memorize a frame of reference, then you can measure things to that frame of reference.
Right. Well, I got
Right, and so even stuff like noticing that what is it? What kind of light is it that it's like a B, or it's like between a B flat and a B. There's a high pitch. What is it? What kind of lights are those? Not
fluorescent?
fluorescent lights. I think it's fluorescent lights. So if everything's quiet and you listen closely, you can hear that. You can hear, you know. So stuff like that is taught in these courses. Now, obviously, yeah, everyone can learn relative pitch, and I think there are degrees of being able to recognize pitch that may be specifically related to the instrument that you play. So, for instance, in my case, I don't have perfect pitch. In other words, I don't have the ability to, with the piano or with an instrument that the timbre is the same, even over the range, just higher or lower. I can tell you what range you're in, but I can't tell you what the note is, right? But I can with saxophone, flute, clarinet. I'm starting to be able to do this with trumpet and the other instruments that I play, like, you know, bass in guitar. I mean, you can sort of hear the timbre and the difference of the notes on the strings. You know, obviously if you hear an open string, then you can do, you know, math and, you know, and figure out what it is. But especially with saxophone, flute, and clarinet, and those are the instruments that I've played the longest. I can hear every note. Like, I mean, I don't need a frame of reference. I know what note's being fingered, you know, and to the point where if someone was detuned by a quarter tone, I can still tell you what note they're fingering. Because the sensitivity that I have is not based on an absolute sense of where the pitch is. It's not based on 440. It's based on timbre and intonation characteristics and notes being sounding more open and, more muffled because of the, rather imperfect nature of the saxophone. I'm always fascinated by folks that have perfect pitch and how many how long until you knew you had perfect pitch, or that's what you called it, or that everybody didn't have it? Because that's something that some of my friends have told me is like, well, I just thought everybody could hear, notes, and it wasn't until, such and such a time, When was that?
Well, I think I always had it, but I didn't know what it was. And I remember my mother always played music in the car, and I would, hear the popular songs on the radio, and I would always associate the song, the key of the song, with the time of the day and the color of the sky. I think I had some synesthesia happening when I was a kid. And
really?
Yeah. So certain keys I would correlate with certain colors for certain time of the day, the color of the sky. And I went this way all the way up until I was 12, when I started playing flute. And I remember one day we had the buzzer for class, and I heard it, and it was always out of tune. It would always bother me. And I remember even turning on the AM station, I would go nuts. I'm like, turn it off. And my parents are like, what's wrong with you? I'm like, I can't. Something is weird about the frequency. I didn't know it was frequency, but it was bothering me.
Right.
So at 12, I told my band teacher, I was like, man, that A flat's really out of tune. He looked at me. He was like, what did you say? And I didn't have my instrument. I was like, that A flat is out of tune. And he was like, he went to the piano. He started plucking out notes. And I started just telling him. I didn't think anything of it. And he was like, you have perfect pitch. He was like, what's that? He was like, that's when you hear pitches and you know exactly what they are. And I was like, oh, hey, I always thought life was like this.
Yeah, right. Yep.
But that was my first encounter, knowing what it was.
Yeah, I had a student. I teach at Ohio State. And I had a student, and he's been graduated for some years, and he went on to get a master's degree at another school. So this would have been, I don't know, 5 or 6 years ago when he was still with me, and that would have been towards the end. And when I was talking to him about it, he didn't know until he was taking lessons with a good friend of mine, another great saxophone player named Brian Olszewski. And basically Brian told him that he had perfect pitch. He didn't know that he had perfect pitch. One of my best friends, his name's Doug Pierce. I interviewed him also. He's got perfect pitch. And Doug is, and he's a great composer and arranger and stuff. And I've asked him lots of questions and really tried to poke and prod him like it's some kind of experiment, to ask him a lot of questions about like when he knew he had perfect pitch, and then are there certain steps that he's had to go through? Has his perfect pitch improved? Like, has he been able to tweak certain things or whatever? I've asked him these kind of questions, and he told me that he found out relatively early on that he had perfect pitch, and his perfect pitch actually got more accurate. And then I know someone else, Bobby Floyd, and Bobby Floyd is great piano player, played with the Basie band, played with everybody, and he lives in Columbus. And Bobby, he's been playing since he was 2 or something, right? And he told me that his perfect pitch has started to sort of detune a bit as he's gotten older.
Yeah, that happened. I think it, because I remember I was talking with Bertha Hope about the same thing. She has perfect pitch, and I used to talk with Wallace about this too because he had perfect pitch. And
Hmm.
I think there's something about either aligning with whatever is happening with the universe. There's periods
Mm.
where you might feel a few cents sharp or a few cents flat as far as where you're registering the pitch.
Hmm.
So I know for me, I'll have days where, and it doesn't happen often, it happens every now and then, once in the blue moon, where you'll hear a C sharp, but between the C and C sharp zone, if something happens where your meter, your internal meter is kind of shifted.
Mm.
So what you normally hear in tune you might hear in tune a few cents sharp or a few cents flat, and it's unnerving. It's registering as in tune, but it's not, and then it shifts right back. So it happens.
Now I have to ask, in particular, with playing saxophone.
Hmm.
Okay, so saxophone is, especially the tradition of the instrument. There's something that I call bebop tuning, and I know you know what I'm talking about because it probably bugs the heck out of you. Where and it actually started prior to bebop because Lester's playing sharp and Coleman Hawkins is playing sharp, but Charlie is really playing sharp, right?
Mm.
And the way I explain this to my students is this is not due to poor musicianship. This was a way to solve a common issue. So the issue is that trumpet is, can project much better than a woodwind instrument, right? And if you're in a club with no amplification and everyone's talking and clanking glasses and you're standing right beside the drummer, you have to do something to be able to cut through.
Right.
And so they discovered if you played a little higher, then you could cut through.
Right.
And unfortunately, when that's the sense of pitch that they developed from doing that. So when you went to record, they also played sharp.
Right.
And then everybody that studied all of the, these early saxophone players, they all played sharp. Dexter played sharp. Everybody played sharp, right?
Right.
And so now if you contrast that with the way that the modern saxophone player plays, so we have a lot of advantages. One of the advantages that we have is affordable and portable amplification. Okay, so we have that. Second thing is mouthpiece technology has totally changed the game, right? So if we had the same mouthpiece technology with Charlie Parker, he wouldn't have had to play sharp to be able to cut through. And so where am I going? So all the modern horn players, we're all practicing, we're learning all these transcriptions, right?
Right.
We're, playing with the recording, and you have to tune up to the recording,
Yep.
or else you're not going to be able to really nail all the nuance, right?
Right.
But then we also are playing in all of these different kind of settings, playing in pop horn sections, playing in church, playing different, all kinds of different things, playing in a, big band where everybody's playing in tune.
Right.
Right. So then it's like we have to have two senses of where the pitch is, sharp and in tune. And then the saxophone itself is not really in tune.
No, and if you even go back, the cats that were playing those older horns, they definitely were.
Right.
That happened even later on. That the standard horns today compared to what they were using is completely different.
Right. So I have to ask, because, you know, like I said, you know, I know a lot of folks, got a lot of buddies that have perfect pitch. One of the things that we used to do is we would intentionally detune our instruments. You know, and this is actually a teacher's technique too. So say if you have a student that has perfect pitch, you need to be able to you know, grade them fairly like everyone else. So you have to find a different way to do that. And you know, so as far as developing relative pitch and all that kind of stuff, you know, someone with perfect pitch never has to develop relative pitch because you know what every note is.
Right.
But if things are detuned, then it might force you to have to do some of that. Has that been your experience?
Yeah, I mean, especially when you check out the older recordings and you try and transcribe them, you
Yeah.
notice there's a few cents on the sharper side, or sometimes even a half step on the sharper side, and you just have to either like you said, push in all the way and just kind of make it work, or just try to figure it out in that key and then kind of work backwards and getting it together. And
Now, when you pushing in, is that like hurting your soul?
it hurts. You know,
It's,
it, it's interesting because um, even how we perceive pitch, it's changed so much. Like I remember I was playing with a band and they play on the sharper end, and it took a second for me to adjust because my inner perfect pitch was like, no, this is where it is. But they played on a higher end. And then also in certain situations where you're dealing with trumpet sections, the natural tendency of the trumpet is to get higher and higher and higher as the gig is going on. So you
right,
have to adjust accordingly throughout the gig and
right,
make, otherwise it's going to be a huge gap, and it's super obvious, especially when you're playing parts or those inner parts and you
right.
have those interests and they're not lining up, or those specific voicings where you have to play them in tune. So I had to really just kind of cancel that out and make the adjustment. But then, of course, when I play with other ensembles, I realized, oh my gosh, I got to adjust it now again back to
Yeah.
normal because I'm not in that type of playing scenario. And it was a challenge. I remember it took me a couple of months to kind of shift back just because I had been playing for a minute in that kind of situation. It was more on the sharper end. It's
Mm,
it's challenging sometimes. I mean, perfect pitch has its pros and it has its I don't want to say minuses, but it has its things you have to work out. I mean, that's one
hmm.
of them because you
Yeah.
hear absolute and you have to break out of that, get used to or accustomed to being able to shift a little bit, especially in those playing situations where you just have to go with what's happening.
Yeah.
And then,
Yeah.
of course, when you're learning the instrument, sometimes learning about perfect pitch, you're learning it through an absolute approach where, oh, that's a, that's a C sharp, that's a D. But you have to teach yourself how to hear in the whole context, not just in targeting individual notes.
Mm.
That becomes another muscle that you have to develop and kind of
Mm.
apply. Because sometimes, especially for young students, when they have perfect pitch, oh, I memorized it, I learned it in like one or two settings. You kind of have some fake photographic memory too with that too. But then the challenge is, okay, we'll play it a half step. And then you see the students kind of like struggling because they haven't developed that muscle memory. So
Right.
you have to make sure that you're dotting your I's and you're crossing your T's with perfect pitch. Otherwise, you're going to be learning it in a very limited capacity, and it's not going to be able to help you
Mm.
expand your way of thinking, expand your way of hearing. I mean, even harmony. For me, Wallace and I would have conversations about this all the time because when you're learning theory or when you're learning harmony, you hear it like, oh, that's a 2-5-1 going in here, going down a half step. Okay, then it's going up a main third. Okay, cool. But if you're trying to play around those sounds, you're only used to hearing what you got coming in. You have to teach yourself how to be keen to what exists around those sounds and then force yourself to play with those sounds and get accustomed to them.
I see. I
Yeah.
see. Very interesting.
Yeah.
I interviewed Rick Beato. You know who that is?
No.
So Rick Beato, he has a son, and you may know the son better than you know Rick. Now Rick has like 1.8 million subscribers on YouTube now, but back then he was just the guy that was sitting down at the piano having his son doing all this ridiculous stuff. His son has perfect pitch, and he's all over the place. He has him spell out all of these ridiculous stuff, all this cluster chords and all this crazy stuff.
Yes.
And there was some stuff that was circulating like on Facebook and stuff. That was those videos. Well, he has, what is it, Neural? Is it Neural? Now I can't think of the name of the playlist, but he, in his research, he discovered that you could do certain things when a kid is very young to cause them to develop perfect pitch. Once you get beyond a certain age, you can't do it anymore. But when you're really young, you can actually learn perfect pitch. And so he would play this playlist of really like sophisticated like music, and polytonal stuff and all kinds of stuff. And it was playing all the time. And so his son developed this perfect pitch, and then of course he, with the training and everything. So it's just like, it's all kind of crazy. But it's very interesting because Rick doesn't have perfect pitch. Right? But he figured out a way to make it so that his son did. Yeah. Which is, it's very interesting. Like the brain it's like soft, and it's like very malleable at in those formative years, and so you can develop all of these things.
Yeah.
Even stuff like speaking multiple languages and all of that.
Right.
Yeah.
This is all using fear. I think for me, I probably developed it too when I was about 4 or 5, because I was taking violin via the Suzuki method. My mom had me taking lessons, and everything we learned as far as, listening and being able to channel what we hear and find it on our instrument, that skill, we were starting that at 4 or 5 years old. So even though I had quit and I didn't pick up another instrument until another 7 or 8 years later, I still have that connection,
Right.
understanding of being able to hear instrument. Yeah.
I wonder also if your mother is a piano player. It makes me wonder if when you were a baby and you were hearing her practice and play around the house, that it seems like that may have something to do with it too.
Oh, definitely. I mean, she was always playing music around me, whether it was playing piano or just records. And then she was singing too. So she was always singing, and she always had music around me. I just kind of, even though I wasn't accessing, I was still channeling it in like a son.
So let me ask you, what is it about? I was looking, and I guess your undergraduate degree is not in music.
Yeah.
So let me ask you, what is it about music that is so compelling? Why do you do music? Why is music the thing for you?
I mean, it's what I love, to be able to hear sounds and to be able to understand those vibrations and to be able to internalize those colors. There's something magical about that when you hear somebody play on their horn a melody that sounds like it's singing. Like when I hear Train, when I hear Dexter, I hear the color, the texture. I can also hear their their, their inner personality. And there's something that's powerful about that, being able to communicate that without words. And I know for me, when I first heard Dexter, when I first heard Sarah, the first thing that came to my mind was, let me figure that out. And that has always been my main driving force in learning about this music, trying to just get to the source of figuring it out. That's the fire. Can't live without that.
You know, okay, so this is, you know, I have a 7-year-old.
Mm-hmm.
His name's Moses.
Oh.
And Moses is he's the center of everything. You know, that's what happens. You know, you have kids, they totally transform your perception of reality and all kinds of stuff that, you know, I thought was like super important. Like all of a sudden, like I don't even think about that stuff anymore. I don't even remember thinking about it. They'll cause you to do stuff like sleep on the floor in their room every night and stuff like that. It's quite incredible, which is not good for your back, by the way. But you know, my wife, Lori, she is a dancer. She's a choreographer. She has her own dance company, and she's creative. She's got a interior decorating business, and she teaches dance. And so she's done dozens and dozens of productions. And she, like I said, she's super creative. So he's going to rehearsals with her all the time. He's going to rehearsals with me all the time. All the time, we're in some kind of rehearsal. I remember I was working at a church. It's a big mega church in Columbus, and this is when he was, you know, right when he was born. And I would have him in the car seat, you know, take the car seat out, right? And he's still sleeping. And I would play the first service, and he's behind me on the floor behind me, you know, and nobody can see him. I'm just there because, you know, I just wanted him to be close, and I wasn't quite ready to put him in to like child care yet. Like I didn't really want to do that. You know, he asked me about, you know, hey, you know, you're going to give me a lesson? Because, you know, there's a, but behind, so, you know, these are my, you know, I don't really play drums, but these are my electronic drums. I can, you know, I like MIDI kind of stuff, computer generated stuff. So this is my MIDI drums. There's something behind these. You see those bass guitars on the wall right there, like right under those, but you can't see it because something's black. It's this little kid's set of drums.
And got a baby.
Yeah, he's got a set of drums. He's got a P trumpet. I got him a P trumpet, and and a guitar and a pedal board and stuff. And, you know, on a recorder and stuff. So there's all this stuff that's laying around the house, and every once in a while he'll come and say, hey, you know, can you give me a lesson? But really what he wants to do is he just wants to come down in my space and sit on my lap, right? That's really what he wants to do. And he's a typical boy, so he just wants to do all the rough and tumble stuff, football and baseball and basketball. I mean, he just wants to do all that kind of stuff, you know. It makes me realize how weird I was, because I started when I was 6, a year younger than him, and that's all I wanted to do. It was the only thing I wanted to do. I just went and practice. My dad was a great saxophone player, so I heard him playing around the house, and I kept asking him, hey, you're going to show me how to do this? You're going to show me how to do this? And as soon as he started showing me, that's all I wanted to do. And I am absolutely, I don't have a choice. I don't have a choice. I would be absolutely miserable. But there is this thing where, as a teacher, you know, you can want your student to be successful, and you can want your student to be able to, you know, do music for a living and all of that. And sometimes you just have to be honest and say, maybe this is not for you. I mean, how miserable would you be if you weren't doing it for a living? Well, I guess I wouldn't be totally miserable. Yeah, you probably should choose something else then.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah. Yeah, it's that thing. It's like when you love it, you can't live with it. And if you can have a second thought about it, then it's like, well, 9 times out of 10, if you have to choose, this wouldn't be the thing you choose if it was a life or death situation. And I
Isn't
know
it,
for me, yeah,
part
not
part of me, I'm sorry. Part of me feels almost
okay.
bad about admitting that. Like, I love music. I want other people to love music, you know, but I don't know. In good conscience, could I force someone, or would I want to push someone in that direction that isn't totally lost without music? Because it's hard. It's a tough life.
It's very tough. And I think the thing that I might get in trouble here, but oh well.
Mm,
I
that's
think,
all right.
especially when you're talking about jazz, I mean, we've kind of, in the last, what, 30, 40 years, with 50 probably, made it into like an educational kind of thing where it's like, okay, well, if you learn it this way, this is a formula. This is going to get you the gig every time. This, if you do it this way, plus B always equals C. But the reality of this music is that it wasn't built on that foundation.
No.
And then we don't understand how it works as a function. This function was a way of life for many Black people. This was how we survived the last 400 years in this country. So the music was a
Right.
reflection of our life. So when you create this framework of, okay, well, music is this career that's going to be, if you do this and that and this and that, if you get this paper, get this gig, ta-da, you'll be successful. When in fact, that's actually not the reality of this music. And many times, even if you look at the history, which I always tell my students, read the books. Don't just play the tunes out the fake book. Read the books, read the history, because you're going to learn and understand what the lifestyle of the musicians was at that time, socially, mentally, emotionally, economically, everything, and how that relates to what the music represents. So that when you're listening to it, you have a full 360 understanding of what it was to do what they did and what it required of them. And
Yeah.
then when you teach children about this music, that's the one thing that gets left out, which is
Mm.
the one thing that's going to help you determine if this is a path that you really want to do that you cannot live without. You can't live without.
Mhm.
Or if there's another path that is maybe within the field, but
Right.
different
Right.
from, taking this life as a musician. It's really deep, and you have to know what you're walking into before you commit.
Yeah. It is really tough. It's tough because in in one hand, you don't want to sort of, you don't want to like steal all the hope.
One thing,
You don't want to. Right. You don't want to take all the joy away.
yeah,
But on the other hand, it's like, but this is like the real stuff, and you can't live on love. I mean, I'm sorry, you can't. I mean, love doesn't pay the bills. Love doesn't. I mean, you have to be able to turn it into something tangible, into resources that can actually pay your bills. And if you're not going to be committed enough and be willing to do what it takes and follow it, 100% every second, then what are you going to do? And let alone, even if you do all the right stuff, one thing I've noticed in these interviews that I've been doing, basically started these interviews when the pandemic started.
mm-hmm.
But one thing I've noticed is that most everybody, and I've interviewed Winton and Branford and a long list of A-list folks. Everybody is like on this like record-setting pace for the year. 2020 is supposed to be, the greatest, the biggest thing. Like everything is just happening. All the stuff is getting booked. All these high profile things, television stuff, and all kinds of crazy stuff, right?
Yeah.
And then overnight, that stuff just evaporates. Yeah. And what do?
I think this is that time where even musicians that are doing this, that are established, like myself and others, we're at this point in our career where it's kind of like, okay, this day actually is here, the day where you're not performing to make a living, because that's what many of us do. We work performing all over the place. So now what? Yeah. These are the other options. I mean, like right away, within weeks of the pandemic, I and so many other of my friends and colleagues were learning how to record, how to mix, how to master. Then you're learning how to video edit, because right away it was like, okay, overnight, everything is online.
Yeah.
And now we're having to teach ourselves how to do production, how to do high quality production, because now you're in a situation where what you put out is a reflection of what you do. It's not a matter of just showing up to the gig and like, well, I practice. This is how I sound. Well, if it sounds terrible, it doesn't even matter what you do. So I think it's a matter of teaching students to understand what this music really, really requires of you as a person, but then also the possibility of what exists outside of performance. I mean, of course, we never want to think about that, but today is proving that. How can you survive as a musician if you cannot perform? What are the other options to be able to support you and get you through till you're able to get back and perform?
So I interviewed a few folks that live in France. One of them, Rick Margitza. Mm-hmm. Of course, Rick Margitza is from Detroit, but he lives in France now. And Rick played with Miles and everything. I also interviewed Jay Metcalf. He's the Better Sax guy. Those videos, Better Sax, he does a lot of product reviews and things. And when I was talking to him, he used to live in New York. And he was talking about all the stuff that he had to do to make a living, you know. He was doing instrument repair and doing all the gigs he could do and teaching lessons and everything else. And he was talking about how, you know, he was still relatively young. So he was like, well, you know, if I don't have to have insurance, that saves some money, you know, and it's like a real thing that people, you know, have to wrestle with. Am I going to eat or am I going to have insurance? You know, it's kind of that kind of equation. And he was talking about how, when he moved to France, how things changed so much. And it actually put him in a situation where, because the way that their system is set up, you basically, as long as you have a certain number of gigs, then you basically are given, you're basically getting a living wage and insurance, health insurance. So then he was able to basically get the Better Sax thing going because he could actually do that, because he didn't have to spend every second, you know, chasing money.
Yeah.
And, you know, I think part of what's happening right now is an indication that there's aspects of the way that our country operate that are just not effective. They're not effective for everyone. So I'm a realist now, and my wife is she's an optimist, and often she will say that she's a realist, but she's really saying optimistic things, and she'll say that I'm a pessimist, but actually I'm really just saying realistic things, right? So a realist can see things tries to see things for face value. So if it is negative, then they'll say something negative. If it's positive, then they'll say something positive. But it's not a matter of seeing it a certain way or not. And obviously I'm biased in that whole, can you truly see yourself? And the answer to that is no. That's why we need other people and all of that. So, take what I'm saying with a grain of salt. But it is, I've been very disappointed in the sort of lack of coverage to these issues, right? These issues as they relate to musicians in particular, but probably to all people that are in service industries.
Yeah.
I mean, this thing came through and just destroyed everything. You went from hero to zero overnight. And when I turn the news on, when I turn television on, I don't hear any conversation about it. It's as if we're totally invisible.
Yeah. It's hard because I've talked with quite a lot of friends and mentors and musicians, and being a musician is already a hard thing to do because you make a lot of you're trying to perform and really stay true to the art. You make a lot of sacrifices. Already just you don't see your family. You don't get to deal with the life events because you're trying to pursue your art and you're trying to also sustain yourself and take care of yourself financially. This is not about the $1 million gig that buys you a house. Unfortunately for jazz, this country doesn't really value this particular genre of music in that capacity to pay like that. So if you're doing this music, you're doing it because you love it.
Yeah.
And it's a fight. It's an uphill fight. So you're already dealing with the ups and downs of the career, of the gig coming through, of the gig falling through. And then when this happened, just to see how the arts industry was not even addressed was
no, not at all.
Because we already deal with ups and downs just by the nature of this career. But this is like an epic low. And I know a lot of folks are just struggling with that because it's hard already trying to do this. And then to see that there's no attention to the fact that people have literally lost their livelihoods for God knows how long. They do not know how they're going to pay the bills. They're already in situations where they're making that choice of insurance or pay rent. And now we're down to nothing. No gigs, nothing.
Yeah, and that thing I was saying about, Jay, insurance or eat, that kind of thing.
Yeah.
That was before the pandemic. That was like way before. That was when stuff was good.
Oh. Yeah. I mean, now my heart just breaks because it's already hard to keep your spirit up and to stay inspired to want to keep going forward and playing the music. But for a lot of people, this was the thing that kept us going, despite having to fight just to do this, and now to not be able to do it at all. Like I know in New York State, they had banned performing with ticketed venues. And that was like low to so many of us because it was like, okay, we don't have any gigs, but at least we can, look forward to playing for the local coffee shop down around the corner, get a few bucks to get some bread. But to be considered as just incidental music when you have a whole industry that has been built and that is based off, but the tourism is based off it. It really hurts. Yeah.
Yeah. You said something a little earlier about missing, all the, so many things we have to sacrifice, and even aspects of just normal living life, we have to
Family.
sacrifice in family and stuff. And, you know, the way I, you know, express this sentiment to my students is to say, when you know, when I'm going to talk about squares are 9 to 5 people. When a square is on, we're on. And when they're off, we're on. Because holiday parties, they're cutting loose, we're on. You know, Christmas, New Year's, you know, Valentine's Day, you know, all the major holidays. If things are going right for your career so that you can actually somewhat get by and make a living, then you're going to be on
All the time.
And then let alone for people that are married. This a whole nother thing. Picking or just picking the right kind of people to be in those kinds of relationships with is really difficult, because there's not a lot of people that will understand why you want to practice 5 hours a day for a gig that plays $50. People don't, there's not a lot of, the math doesn't work on that.
Or even an instrument that you want to invest in.
Right. The math does not work on that equation. So you have that issue, and having someone that is okay with you spending all of this time working on something, developing something, and then being gone all the time. Well, we were supposed to have a date this weekend. Somebody just called me for this gig, and I have to kind of take it because, nobody else is calling me right now. So, and I don't want to get the reputation of, the guy that doesn't want to work. So that's a real thing. Like, having to say yes, all the time, having to say yes. I think the goal is to get to the point where you can say no.
Right.
But you have to say yes for most of your life. Then to get to, and then you'll get to a period of time, a fairly short period of time when then you can say no to anybody you want to say no to. So it's just it's kind of a challenging thing all around. It
is, especially when you make all the sacrifices and you find out, okay, I can't even continue working to support my family. And you spent so much time in your craft and trying to, develop as an artist and create these accomplishments that are super hard to do. Especially, if you're looking at jazz in particular, it's not like all the venues are there. So many of them are closing because of this pandemic. So it's almost like I look forward to after we somehow get out of this. When the numbers are already starting to kind of, go down.
Yeah, economy was booming and stuff was just really going well, and then, now you have a hefty percentage of these jazz clubs that are having to close their doors forever, because you can't just be open. You got to make money.
Yeah.
Oh man. Okay, let's talk about something even more depressing now. Sometimes you got to laugh so you don't cry, right? I guess that's what the music is about too, right?
Yeah.
Gives us that kind of that release.
Yeah, it does. It certainly does. I think that's the biggest part that hurts a lot of us musicians. Not having space to release or interact.
Yeah. So okay, so let me ask you: Are you more of an introvert or are you more of an extrovert?
Definitely. I've learned to become more extroverted over the years.
Okay.
Actually, being a musician and working in this field it forced me to learn how to be a little more extroverted.
Okay, so I'm definitely an introvert. I knew you were an introvert already. We recognize each other. Okay, so the introvert extrovert thing. So my wife is definitely an extrovert,
Uh-huh.
and I think something with this pandemic is obviously it doesn't affect everyone the same way,
Mm.
right? So being isolated, and not being able to do all the things that you usually do, it has, obviously it has a disproportionate impact. I think on people that are extroverts, truly extroverts, I think this has been really, really devastating.
Yeah.
My wife knows everyone. I'll give you an indication of how many people she knows and how many people know her and everything. So, we live in Columbus, Ohio. We've lived here since we've been married and everything. And it's since before we were married. So we've both been here for a long time. And I don't even know that. I think I've been in Pittsburgh a few times, right? But I think she's only been in Pittsburgh maybe a couple times, right? And so this is way before Moses and stuff. This is years ago. We went to a preseason game for a Steelers game in Pittsburgh. So we decided, okay, this is going to be our vacation. So we're going to go to Pittsburgh. We can drive to Pittsburgh. We'll get a hotel. We'll go to a game like this. So we go to this game, and she doesn't know anybody in Pittsburgh. How come I hear a woman yelling, Lori, Lori? So yeah. That was a lot. That was a lot of setup for not much of a punchline, but but the point is that no matter where we go to grocery store, we can go out of town. It doesn't matter. People just know her, and that's because she's easy to talk to. She's very friendly. She's super social, and she's warm and kind and all that kind of stuff. And she just really, really loves people. Now, it's not that I don't love people. I love people, and I love certain people a lot more than others. But, so if I had to go to a mixer, for instance, I went to a mixer and I didn't know anybody. If I was there for an hour, I'd need about a week of sleep to recover from that. It is so energy depleting because I can't small talk. I have no small talk skills. Let's talk about something real, because I have about two things I can talk about. I can talk about the weather for a little bit, and but that whole small talk thing is just not really there. Now her, on the other hand, she goes to an event like that and she doesn't need sleep now. She don't need to sleep for a couple days or something. And I'm like, I don't get this. I can't do that. That's just not my thing. Now, people confuse people that are introverts as being extroverts that are artists, that play on the stage, or that are teachers, because they don't realize the component of interaction with people that is energy depleting. It's not the one-on-one conversation like we're having. This is actually rejuvenating, right? It's not the one-directional communication, as in teaching or as in performing, where you don't have to compete for anyone's attention. Right? It's all of the other small talk stuff and all of that other sort of connecting stuff
Yeah.
that just feels like a ton of bricks, hauling around a ton of bricks after a while.
Yeah, your brain is like overload, overload, overload. Yeah, it's funny because like for me, I love performing because it's like you get to be in the music and work it out and just
Yeah.
be in the moment. And I don't mind being on the stage with people looking because we're working it out and we're having fun and they're listening along and the
Right.
energy is you get to feed off of it and vice versa and it's a great experience.
Yeah.
Afterwards, I'm like the first person that's like bye,
Yeah.
just
Yeah.
because I don't like when it comes to social setting. I can socialize, but it's almost like that. It's like something about the brain being constantly, even though we're doing that when we're performing, but it's a different aspect of it. So
Yeah.
it's not the same. But
Yeah.
doing a social event, sometimes I'm like, okay, you can do this, you can do this. And you go in there the first 15 minutes, you're kind of like, okay.
That's right. That's right. I had enough. Now, I'll tell you one thing that has worked out for me is because my wife is such an extrovert and she knows everyone. We go to one of these kind of events where I don't know anybody.
Yeah.
She sets it up. She'll do like she does the work to break the ice, and she'll be like, you might want to talk to him because he's a musician too, or you might want to talk to her because she teaches at a university. Talk to her, that kind of thing. She'll do that, and then it's not
It's
nearly
weird.
as taxing.
Yeah. Completely understand that.
And I frequently hear people say stuff like, because I don't talk a lot. I mean, you're probably like, right, you don't talk a lot. Well, you're talking a lot now. But I don't talk a lot if I don't know people, I don't have anything to say because I don't, what are we going to talk about? So, I'm very quiet and, I'm shy. I guess that's the word to use. And so when people actually do finally hear me talk, and because they give me a breadcrumb, and the breadcrumb is something very specific that I know a lot about, and then I start really going into it and talking about it, they're like,
You can talk.
"That's right. That's the most I ever heard you say."
Yeah. Yeah. That's how it
It's
works.
funny.
It's crazy though, because like when you're performing, you don't think about it.
No.
But then when you're in those situations where there's a lot of people and you have to be the initiator and talking, it's hard. I don't know
Mhm.
why. It's just hard. Yeah.
Yeah, I really think it's the small talking. It's the small talking that does it. If it, I'll say this, and I made this mistake before because I was like, okay, I figured it out. I was like, okay, small talking is the thing that I don't like to do. So I can go to a social gathering and I can just start getting deep right away. And that's a mistake. Because they're like, what is wrong with this person?
Yeah. Yeah. Because then it's like, wait, how are you shy? And you're so deep.
Right.
Heavy.
Oh, yeah, but I mean, and you're going to scare people that way. You're going to scare people off because it's a little bit too much transparency too soon, especially these days, because I think people think that they're pretty kind of standoffish and apprehensive. They're
Yeah.
like, oh, I don't know about you. Like, what should I tell you? What should I?
Uh,
There's a lot of that.
and then also social media has made it so that our attention spans is like
Oh,
zero. So, and that's the other thing. Like, if you're really shy and you're really not the kind of person to just jump in and start a conversation, you're it takes so much just to initiate, and then to be able to hold it with somebody and their attention just kind of, it just feels like, okay.
I just don't like fighting for people's attention, and I know that probably comes off as like entitled or something, like I deserve people to pay attention to me or something. I don't really mean it that way, but I just don't want to do that, because I mean, if we're really talking, then pay attention, and you listen and when I'm talking, and I listen when you're talking, you know, and we're like paying attention, and I'm not looking at my cell phone when we're talking. I'm not doing this other stuff, right? You're not doing that stuff also. We have actually real conversation, unlike the programming that we're missing right now that's on TV. Well, actually, it might be over by now, but you know, I was saying before we got started that we're missing the opportunity to throw remotes at the television right now. So, but you know, it's too bad that in our national politics, there's no conversation. I mean, there's no real communication happening. It really is just talking points.
And then it's also cancel culture too.
Oh.
People don't
Oh no.
to learn or to understand. It's just like, oh, cancel. And it's sad, especially even dealing with the arts. Cancel.
Oh.
I hit cancel. Who are you? Cancel. We kind of adapted that as a way of life and interacting with each other.
Oh my goodness. And I'll tell you what is, it's a moving, it's like the goalposts keep moving, right?
Yeah.
For what will invalidate you, what will cancel you. So like last week it was okay to say this. Okay, now I say that this week and now I'm canceled. You know, you remember with Kevin Hart, they did some dumpster diving. They found some stuff 10 years old, you know, that he had said. And he's a comedian. So he jokes, he says stuff that's edgy and that's funny. And obviously what it was that he said was not serious. It was, he didn't actually mean what it was. It's a joke. And that's why he ended up not hosting the what was it, the Oscars or whatever, yeah, that year. But it's like, what? Like, come on, man. I'll tell you, comedians, I think, get it the worst from the cancel culture, but then we're a close second. We're a close second.
Yeah, everybody. I mean, even if I feel like even with social media, sometimes it's a bullying thing, because it's like, do you believe me, or you follow what I believe, or you're canceled. Like, I remember somebody messaged me about something because I guess they wanted me to repost it or whatever. And because I didn't repost it in a matter of time, I guess they started kind of unfriending me.
Oh, come on, man.
Like, first off, we're people. We have conversations with each other. You don't just put things on people's laps and say, you either agree with me or disagree with me, or else you're canceled. That's not how it works. The person can agree with you, but you need to give them a chance to say, hey, I agree with you, or hey, here's my point. This is where I disagree, but here's where I agree. This is what I'm willing to do. There's a whole conversation that happens that is just completely cut out. And people take this notion of you're for us or you're against us by how fast you react or how fast you don't react. And it's like, okay, you got to give the person a chance to even communicate, part of the conversation. And It's like that with so many things, or even with some of the movements that are happening. It's like, well, first and foremost, if we live together as a community, we have to have that space for conversation. If we don't have that conversation, then what's the point? This is the equivalent of kids just being like, well, I don't like you because you blah, blah, blah. And it's like, that's not how this world functions. We're adults. We're supposed to have conversation. We're supposed to agree or disagree, or have conversations where we could explain how we disagree and come to work to something. Show our facts, show our research, show where we stand with our points and how we support our feelings. And if we okay, are wrong, then fine. Let's have a conversation about that. Have a chance to be able to interact. That's
Yeah, it's really a sad state of affairs.
yeah.
And you know, I'm sorry to say, again, I'm a realist. I don't see this getting any better. I'm really, if I can see something that's better, I will say it.
Yeah.
If there was something, a sliver of light, I would express that. But I really don't know how we back out of this.
I think, and I'm not trying to be a pessimist, but I think it's going to get worse till it gets better.
Yeah.
It's going to probably have to bottom out till we have to.
You mean we're not at the bottom yet?
I mean, it seems like it just gets more absurd and outrageous
Oh, every day.
to the point where like I can't even believe it. Like I can't even laugh at this as a joke. Like this is unbelievable. It's like this is reality.
Yeah, it's really crazy. Like I was talking to one of my students earlier today, and I said to him, what was it? I mean, you couldn't even. I mean, you couldn't pay a team of Hollywood writers to come up with what's going on right now, like all the combinations of things. And
A lot is happening.
this is way. I mean, it wouldn't be believable. It's like Have you seen the movie Idiocracy?
No, I haven't seen that.
I think it's like a 2004 or 2003 movie, but it's got Luke Wilson and Maya Rudolph. They're the main folks in it, and Terry Crews is in the movie. So here's the premise of the movie. Maya Rudolph was so she's a prostitute, and she's trying to get away from her pimp.
Oh wow, Maya.
Luke Wilson is he's in the military, in the army, but he just has a job where he's not advancing. He hasn't advanced in rank at all. He just sits in the basement of this facility, and once every 3 weeks or something, somebody comes and asks him to to get something that's stored in that facility. All right. So what happens is there's this opportunity for you to get in this 1 year long like it's not incubator, but like a time capsule. Okay. And so he signs up for it. She signs up for it because she's trying to get away from her pimp, right? So they both get in the time capsule, and then what happens is the program gets canceled during the time they're in the capsule. And then hundreds of years go by, and then something happens, and they're revived or whatever. They come out of the capsules. But during that time, what has happened is all of the smart people, they have done the right things. They've gone to college. They get married. They keep waiting and waiting, and they have fewer and fewer kids, or they wait too long to have kids, or like this. All the educated people do that. All the people that are total idiots, it's called idiocracy, they're just cranking them out like left and right. It's just crazy, right? So now what it is that the planet is full of idiots, right? So like an IQ test is like, literally an IQ test is putting a square peg in a square hole. Okay? So what happens is, because they pass a series of these this particular tests, which are like tests that you would like test toddler on or something, because they finished those. Both of them were classified as the smartest people on earth. And so then they ended up in the cabinet, in the president's cabinet. Yeah. Now the president of the country, it's Terry Crews, and Terry Crews, he's like a former wrestler, porn star, just all this crazy stuff. He's walking around, he's got guns and stuff. His shirt's off, and it's some crazy stuff. This is like at not a campaign event, but like the State of the Union. He drives in on a 4-wheeler, like ATVs, stuff like that. It's crazy. And they have gotten so dumb and have been marketed so heavy for so long that they really have no idea of what's going on. So one problem that was happening was creating a food shortage, was that they were watering plants, these fields of plants, corn and stuff like that, with Gatorade. Now, the reason for it was because electrolytes, they had this slogan about electrolytes. And so every time they would say, Luke was like, well, I think the problem is that you need to water the plants. And they were like, oh, you mean like what's in the toilet? And it's a really well done movie, and it's totally, like I said, it's a satire, but it's so true. There's so much truth in that movie. If you compare that to what's going on right now, and especially accelerated by social media, and this whole validation by likes, and views, all that kind of stuff, and it's a good movie. I think you would definitely dig it.
I'm definitely gonna check that out.
I think it's on. See, where did I see it? I think it might be playing on HBO.
Okay.
Or something. I can't remember where, because I was talking in one of these interviews. Somebody brought something up, and it caused me to think about that movie. Yeah. And so I was like, man, I haven't seen that movie for a while. So then I went looking for it, and I think it was like HBO or something like that I was able to find it.
I'm gonna check that movie out.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I have some other questions I was going to ask you, but for I don't want this to be too long. We're just going to have you back at some point. I really enjoyed our conversation, and I hope you had a good time.
Oh, I did. Thank you for having me.
Definitely. You have any final words or anything that you would like to plug? I'd like you to have that opportunity too.
Sure. I have a virtual mentorship program for young women musicians in high school, middle school, and college, and beyond, called Behave and Hang, which happens twice a month. You can go to my Facebook page, which is Camille Thurman Music, and I'll be posting some advertisement about it soon. And it's basically just an opportunity for women to ask questions about being a musician and talk with other women musicians. We had Dee Dee Bridgewater, Bertha Hope, but we've also had Regina Carter on as guests. And, any young girls that are trying to figure it out, tell them to come on by, and I'll be happy to put them in on a loop, and we can all figure this out together.
Definitely will. All right. Well, I guess that's our time then.
Okay.
Well, well, like I said, I definitely need to have you back sometime, and hopefully maybe after all this stuff is over, we can talk again, after this election is over. And all right. So I will see you later. You have a good one.
You too. It's a pleasure meeting you.
All right, you too.